Imagine if nearly everything you thought you knew about centuries of history was, well, maybe just plain wrong.
Yeah, like completely off.
What if the maps you studied, the wars, even how nations formed? What if it was all radically different from the history books?
It's not just a thought experiment, is it? It's like pulling the rug out from under everything we think we know about the past.
That's exactly the kind of historical earthquake we're diving into today. Our mission is to unpack these really extraordinary claims from two Russian mathematicians, Anatoly Fomenko and Gleb Nosovsky.
Right, the new chronology. Highly controversial stuff.
Exactly. They argue the historical timeline we all accept is fundamentally flawed, and they say they have solid scientific data to prove it. We're going to zero in on some of their most, let's say, intriguing claims, especially about 18th century maps and this hidden history they supposedly reveal.
And we're basing this on their book, USA Has Issues with Maps of 18th Century, right?
And
part of that big history, fiction, or science series.
That's the one. That's where they lay it all out, piece by surprising piece.
Their core argument, I mean, it's a fundamental challenge. They're basically saying the history we read, mostly put together back in the 16th century, it's based on contradictory stuff, missing originals.
And potentially just blatantly untrue, as they put it.
Yeah, pretty much.
So to even start unpacking a theory this big, who are these guys? Anatoly Fomenko. He's a big name in mathematics, right?
Yeah.
An academician, doctor of physics and maths, Russian Academy of Sciences.
Right, a serious mathematician. And Gleb Nosovsky, his collaborator, also a mathematician, specialized in probability and statistics.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Scientists stepping way outside their usual lane to rewrite world history.
It really is. And their central claim is, well, it's radical. They say written human history only really starts around 8800.
Only 8800. So what about everything before that?
They argue most of what we know actually happened between 81,000 and 1500. Anything earlier. They call them phantom reflections.
Phantom reflections, like duplicates.
Yeah, duplicates or echoes of later events, maybe misdated accidentally, maybe deliberately.
Okay, so if history is squeezed into this shorter time frame, what fills that space? What was going on?
Well, this leads to one of their huge concepts, this massive forgotten empire they call the Russian Horde.
The Russian Horde.
A vast Slav-Turk empire, they claim, that basically dominated Eurasia before the 17th century. And get this, they say groups like the Scythians, Huns, Goths, Mongols, even today's Russians, they were all part of this single horde.
Oh, okay. So diverse peoples, one giant empire. How do they argue this? You mentioned maps earlier.
Exactly. A key part of their evidence comes from 18th century maps. They lean really heavily on the 1771 Encyclopedia Britannica.
Why that specific one?
They see it as like the absolute peak of scientific knowledge at that time. And they use it to point out what they see as major inconsistencies, things that just don't add up.
Okay, let's get into that. You'd think a 1771 Britannica map of Europe would be pretty accurate, wouldn't you?
You'd think so. But Fomenko and Nosovsky point to something missing. A really famous Russian city, Novograd the Great.
Missing.
The maps show Europe in detail, but there's no Novgorod the Great on the River Volkhov or near Lake Ilmen, where historians say it was. Instead, there's a different Novgorod, Novgorod-Seversky, way down south.
So what's their explanation?
They suggest maybe Novgorod the Great wasn't even founded until much later, like late 18th, maybe early 19th century.
That completely rewrites the history of a major city.
Absolutely. And it's not just Europe. They point to the Holy Land depictions, too.
What's wrong there?
The Asia map shows Jerusalem, okay, but no Dead Sea, no River Jordan.
Strange omissions.
Their argument, Europeans just didn't really know the area well before Napoleon went there in the early 19th century.
Which would mean?
Which would mean for them that biblical place names, the Crusades, all that must have happened after Napoleon, much later than we think.
That's a massive shift in the timeline.
It is, and the map oddities continue. Look at Africa.
Okay, what about Africa?
On the 1771 map, the whole South Atlantic Ocean is labeled the Ethiopian Ocean.
Ethiopian Ocean. Never heard of that.
Right. And Ethiopia itself is shown near the equator, while the country we call Ethiopia today is labeled Abyssinia.
So they're questioning what Ethiopia even meant back then.
Exactly. They wonder if it was something totally different, maybe even including parts of South America linked by this Ethiopian Ocean.
Wow. Okay, Africa, the Holy Land, Novgorod.
But you said there was one anomaly central to their whole theory.
Yes. And this is probably the biggest one for them. Muscovite Tartary.
Muscovite Tartary. Sounds vaguely familiar, maybe.
Well, according to the 1771 Britannica, it's listed as an independent state. Its capital is Tobolsk, and it covers almost all of Siberia.
Independent from the Russian Tsars, the Romanovs.
That's what the map suggests, yeah.
Yeah.
Independent until very late in the 18th century. Moscow itself would have been right near its western border.
So not just some vague territory, but a huge independent nation right next door to Moscow. That contradicts everything about Russian expansion.
It absolutely does. And they connect this to North America, too.
How does North America fit in? They look at maps from the 17th and 18th centuries, specifically before about 1773, the western part of North America. Often just a big white blank space, terra incognita.
Unknown land, right?
And California is often shown as an island, which we know is wrong.
Okay, so
Fomenko and Nosovsky argue these lands were blank or wrong because Europeans couldn't get there. Why? Because they likely belonged to Muscovite Tartary, extending right across the Bering Strait.
So this Tartary Empire stretched from Siberia into North America.
That's their suggestion. And this leads to maybe the weirdest part of their map argument, something they call backward progress.
Backward progress, like knowledge went backwards.
Kind of, yeah. They point out that supposedly earlier maps from the 16th century, famous names like Ortelius, Mercator, these maps are actually more accurate in some ways than the later 17th and 18th century ones.
How so?
Those older maps correctly show California as a peninsula. Some even show the Bering Strait accurately, but the later maps get it wrong, showing California as an island.
That is weird. How do they explain losing knowledge?
They don't think knowledge was lost. They think the dates are wrong. They argue those accurate 16th century maps are actually fakes, or misdated originals from the 18th or 19th centuries, made after Muscovite Tartary fell and the geography became known.
So the older maps are actually newer, created to fit a revised history.
That's the implication. Same thing with Novaya Zemlya, the Arctic islands. Shown correctly as islands on earlier maps, but wrongly as a peninsula on many later 18th century ones. For them, it's evidence of map tampering to erase this Tartary.
Okay, so if this Muscovite Tartary was this huge, powerful state reaching into America, what happened to it? How did it fall?
Fomenko and Nosovsky connect its collapse directly to an event we call the Pugachev Rebellion, or Pugachev War, from 1773 to 1775.
Right, usually described as a peasant revolt, led by someone claiming to be the dead Tsar Peter III.
Exactly, but they say, no, this wasn't just some peasant uprising, it was a full-blown civil war. A war between the Romanov dynasty in St. Petersburg and this independent Muscovite Tartary based in Siberia.
What makes them think it was more than a revolt?
Well, the scale of it. Large professional armies were involved on both sides. The Romanovs even sent their top general, Suvorov. That suggests something much bigger than putting down peasants, doesn't it?
It does seem like overkill for a simple revolt. And what about Pugachev himself?
Mainstream history calls him an imposter, a Cossack pretending to be the Tsar. But Fomenko and Nosovsky point to accounts from the time.
What do they say?
They say Pugachev was actually received in towns by priests, by merchants, by the people, as if he was the legitimate Tsar. Some accounts even mention a Tsarina Ostinia Petrovna alongside him.
A Tsarina?
Yeah. And his soldiers called their headquarters Moscow. Not St. Petersburg, the Romanov capital, but Moscow.
Why Moscow?
They suggest it connects back to the old capital of the Horde before Peter the Great moved it. And the name Pugachev. They think the Romanovs made it up. It means scarecrow in Russian, a way to discredit the real leader of Tartary.
So a real war, led by a legitimate ruler of this rival state whose name was deliberately smeared.
That's their narrative. And they find symbolism in other details, too, like Pugachev's gilded palace in a place called Berdy.
Gilded palace, out in the provinces.
Romanov historians dismiss it, saying it was probably just polished brass. But Fomenko and Nosovsky see it as a memory of a real Khan's luxurious camp.
And his trial.
He wasn't tried in a regular court. He was tried in the Kremlin, in the throne hall itself.
Why there?
They interpret it as symbolic. The Romanovs celebrating their victory over old Russia, the Horde right there in its ancient capital, a public ritual stamping out the old regime.
So after this war, Tartary was defeated. What then?
Then, according to the authors, came the cover-up. A systematic campaign by the victorious Romanovs to erase Muscovite Tartary and Pugachev from history.
How'd they do that?
Renaming things, for starters. The River Yaik, a center of the rebellion, was renamed the Ural River. The city of Yaik became Uralsk.
Wiping the names off the map.
Exactly. Disbanding Cossack armies that supported Pugachev. Mass repressions in the conquered lands, like hanging everyone in the town of Zlatust because they made cannons for Pugachev's army.
Brutal.
And controlling the narrative. They even point to Alexander Pushkin, the famous poet, who wrote a history of Pugachev.
Pushkin wrote about Pugachev.
Yes, and Pushkin actually had family connections to Peter III, the Tsar Pugachev claimed to be. But even his work, they say, was directly censored by Tsar Nikolai I himself to make sure it fit the official Romanov story.
So complete erasure, from maps to names to official histories.
That's the picture they paint.
If we follow this idea, what does it mean for Russia itself? You mentioned Peter the Great moving the capital earlier.
Right. They connect that move to St. Petersburg, way over on the Baltic coast, to the fact that there was this hostile power, Muscovite Tartary, to the east. Moving the capital made strategic sense if Moscow was near a hostile border.
And after the war, after 1775.
After the victory, the Romanovs suddenly discovered that their provinces were too big and needed dividing up.
Which sounds like...
It sounds like they were absorbing huge new territories, the lands of the defeated Tartary, and needed to administer them. And all the talk about improving communications to Siberia.
Yeah.
Maybe that meant building new direct roads because the old routes had to go around the hostile Horde territory. Now they could go straight through.
It does create a different kind of logic for those historical events.
Mm-hmm.
Do they offer any other sort of hard evidence for this annexation?
They point to coins, numismatics.
Coins. How do coins prove this?
They highlight the minting of special Siberian coins between 1763 and 1781.
Okay.
This period lines up exactly with their timeline for the conflict and the Romanov expansion into Siberia. These weren't regularly Russian coins. They were specific to Siberia.
And they stopped making them after 1781.
Once. After 1781, regular Russian Empire coins started circulating in Siberia. For Fomenko and Nosovsky, this signals the moment Siberia was fully absorbed, its special status gone.
Is that pattern seen elsewhere?
They say yes. Special coins were often minted for other newly acquired territories like Georgia, Crimea, Poland, Finland during their initial integration phase. So the Siberian coins fit that pattern perfectly, a clear sign of annexation in their view.
Okay, this is already a huge rewriting of Russian and Eurasian history. But then they take it even further, don't they? To America.
Yes. This is where it gets truly mind-bending. The American connection.
What's the connection?
They look at the timing. The Pugachev War ends in 1775. The United States declares independence in 1776.
A coincidence.
Not to them. They claim the American Revolution wasn't just about breaking free from Britain.
What else could it be?
They assert it was also a war against the last American remnants of the Russian Horde.
Wait, remnants of the Horde in America. Attacked by whom?
Attacked from two sides, they claim. By the Romanovs coming from the west, across Siberia and Alaska, and by the American freedom fighters coming from the east.
So the American Revolution was, in part, a pincer movement against this horde.
That's their incredible assertion. And George Washington. They suggest he became the first leader of American territory that used to belong to the Russian Horde, and that this entire aspect of the founding of the USA has been completely erased from history.
I mean...
That's wild.
It just takes your breath away, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The U.S. founded partly on the ruins of a forgotten Russian empire.
It's definitely one of their most startling claims.
Beyond maps and wars, do they look at anything else, like archaeology?
They do. They bring up sites like Arkaim in the Ural Mountains region of Russia.
Arkaim. What's significant about it?
Mainstream archaeology usually dates it to the Bronze Age, like 2000 BC. It's known for quite advanced features for its supposed age metallurgy, big fortifications, even a sewer system.
Okay, so an ancient advanced settlement.
But Fomenko and Nosovsky say, no, forget the Bronze Age dating. They believe Arkaim and similar sites are actually much younger. They see them as citadels belonging to Muscovite Tartary, dating from maybe the 15th to 18th centuries AD.
How do they justify that?
They point to how well preserved some of the wooden and earth structures are. And apparently, when first discovered, local people thought the ruins looked relatively recent. For the authors, this supports their later dating.
So the standard ancient dating is wrong.
They argue that the ancient dating and these ideas about societies rising and falling over millennia are just artifacts. Errors created by applying this flawed standard timeline, the Scaligerine chronology, which they believe duplicates and misdates the same cultures over and over again.
Right. The Scaligerine chronology, that's the standard timeline they reject entirely.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you wonder, how did they even attempt to prove all this scientifically if they throw out standard dating?
Well, being mathematicians, they turn to mathematics and astronomy.
How does math apply to history?
They use statistical methods. For example, they compare the amount of text written about different historical events looking for patterns. They also compare dynastic flows.
Dynastic flows.
Things like how long kings reigned, how they died, patterns of succession. They compare these flows between dynasties that seem totally unrelated, like, say, the kings of Israel and the Roman emperors.
And what do they find?
They claim to find incredibly high statistical correlations, so high that for them, it proves these aren't separate histories, but duplicates of the same history, just misdated and put in different places.
Duplicates. Wow. And astronomy.
They analyze records of ancient eclipses and astronomical observations, like old horoscopes found in tombs or texts. They use calculations to redate these events.
And the results.
They often get radically different dates. They argue things like the famous Almagest star catalog, usually credited to Ptolemy in antiquity, was actually created much later, in the Middle Ages. Same for the Star of Bethlehem, the eclipse during the crucifixion. They shift these events forward by centuries, sometimes over 1,000 years.
A completely different astronomical timeline, too. But what about all the standard dating methods historians and archaeologists rely on? Carbon dating, tree rings.
Well, that's a core part of their theory. They reject almost all of them.
Reject carbon dating.
Yep. They say archaeological methods, dendrochronology, tree ring dating, paleography, studying old handwriting, and especially radiocarbon dating are all non-exact and contradictory.
Why?
On what grounds? They point to inconsistencies, cases where dates don't line up. They even allege that radiocarbon labs sometimes fiddle and fine-tune their results to match what historians already expect.
That's a serious accusation.
It is. They call it a circulus viciosus, a vicious circle. The dating confirms the history, and the history dictates the expected date. They also dismiss dating based on coins, numismatics, as circular because it relies on the traditional chronology they're disputing in the first place.
So basically, they throw out most established methods and substitute their own mathematical and astronomical calculations.
In essence, yeah.
Given how completely this contradicts mainstream history and science, it's probably not shocking that, well, how is it received by academics?
It's universally rejected. Mainstream historians, archaeologists, scientists, they label it pseudoscience. Full stop.
What are the main criticisms? Why the rejection?
Critics slam Fomenko for essentially manipulating data. They say he picks and chooses evidence that fits his theory, ignores anything that contradicts it, and forces mathematical patterns onto historical data where they don't naturally exist.
And the dating methods he rejects.
Mainstream scientists defend those methods. They point to the robustness of things like dendrochronology, which gives a precise year-by-year timeline going back thousands of years, independently verified. They argue radiocarbon dating, while having known complexities, is broadly reliable when used correctly and cross-checked.
What about the sheer amount of physical evidence? Coins, ruins.
Exactly. Critics point to the millions of ancient coins found, consistently dated through context and style, the vast archaeological record. Under Fomenko's theory, huge amounts of this would have to be dismissed as elaborate, widespread forgeries, which seems highly improbable. Linguists also jump in, arguing his methods could prove connections between almost any texts if you manipulate them enough.
So total academic rejection. He even got an anti-prize, you mentioned.
Yeah, in Russia, an award for esteemed nonsense.
Yet despite all that condemnation, his books are apparently really popular. Sold over 1 million copies in Russia, got support from famous figures like Garry Kasparov, the chess champion.
That's true. It has found a significant popular audience, especially in Russia.
How do academics explain that disconnect? Popularity versus scientific rejection.
Some critics suggest its appeal comes from tapping into certain sentiments in post-Soviet Russia. Maybe a desire for a grander national narrative, this idea of a forgotten imperial consciousness or a kind of secular messianism, Russia as having this hidden central role in world history.
So it tells a compelling story that resonates with some people, regardless of the academic view.
That seems to be part of its appeal. It highlights how sometimes a narrative's power can stem from how it makes people feel or what it seems to offer, not just its factual accuracy by conventional standards.
And that seems like a good place to pause our deep dive into the new chronology. We've journeyed through a theory that just turns conventional history on its head.
Definitely. From those strange maps showing a lost Siberian empire, Muscovite Tartary,
to reimagining the Pugachev War, not as a revolt, but a major civil war.
And even rewriting the founding of the USA as partly a conflict against this fading horde.
Fomenko and Nosovsky construct this narrative of a deliberately falsified history, using their math and astronomy as evidence. But, as we've heard, it's overwhelmingly rejected by mainstream scholars as pseudoscience.
Absolutely. But, regardless of whether you buy any of it, the whole exercise forces you to ask some pretty fundamental questions, doesn't it?
Like what?
Like, how do we actually know what we think we know about the distant past? Are the narratives we accept as solid fact really that solid? Could unseen biases or lost information or even deliberate shaping have influenced the story we've inherited?
How much of accepted history is just the version that won out, the most convincing story we were told?
Exactly. Maybe the real deep dive isn't just into Fomenko's theories, but into how historical knowledge itself gets made and how sure we can really be about any of it.